What's up? Number one.
Up.
What's up?
Episode number one. Here we go.
Dude, you guys both have sports team hats on.
Hold on. We need to talk about this. Why? What are you wearing a New York hat for? What is this, Garrett?
Okay, well, I had my San Diego Padres hat on, and I was at the airport, and I lost it, and I was in New York. So I was like, I need to get a New York hat because I was shooting in New York, and that's why I have it.
Okay.
So I'm rocking New York.
But you're back in San Diego now, so you can take that off now.
But my story is my mom was born in New York, so I can rock it because I have New York.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm about to go to New York tomorrow too, so I got to get ready.
Gosh, it reminds me of that King of the Hill episode where he finds out that he was born in New York. He wasn't a true Texan. He freaks out.
Oh my god. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that hat should have a shelf life, Garrett. Maybe like 2 weeks. You can flesh it out, but it's not the jam.
Yeah, I hear you.
Rep the West Coast out here. But here we go. Episode 1, film and in between.
Well, actually, episode two.
Are we okay? Are we saying that was that like a prelude, like an intro prelude?
Yeah. Episode 1 was a prelude. This is episode 2 with our first interviewee.
Yeah, this is the main event, guys.
Yeah, this is episode 1. I think this should be episode 1.
All right. Episode 1.
We can figure it out. We can figure it out in the show. But yeah, we're excited. Jordan, why don't you? We're excited about our. We had a pretty amazing guest. So why don't you? Why don't you give us a little bit of intro? Who we're hearing from, and what we're gonna be talking about today.
Awesome. Yeah. So we interviewed a good friend of mine. I've known him for several years. We lived in Redding, California together. I was privileged enough to shoot a feature documentary with him. His name is Daryl Lefever. He is a producer and just has been in the industry for forever. I mean, some of his credits are amazing. He came up doing huge Hollywood movies.
We're gonna put his IMDb in the like bio
in the show notes.
You should click it. I opened it up last night and I was like, what? Like, dude, it's freaking crazy.
I mean, dude, literally like my childhood experience was wrapped around the movies he made. Like 100%. Mighty Ducks 3. Like, come on, like
Mighty Ducks 3. I didn't know that.
Yeah, George of the Jungle. I mean,
Mighty Joe Young was such a
Mighty Joe Young, dude.
Was such a
Polar Express.
Unbelievable,
so good.
Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah, Where the Wild Things Are. Polar Express, like you said. Yeah, X-Men. Yeah, I mean, just amazing. And he made a transition at some point because he felt like he wanted to tell stories that showed the world that God was good. And so he made a transition into faith-based films and is now with the Irwin Brothers and Kingdom Story Company. He's doing some of the new Jesus Revolution movie that just came out.
Yeah, he's producer on that. American Underdog, I Can Only Imagine.
Right.
Woodlawn, all those movies.
Yeah, just an amazing story. So we got to go in and dive deep into how that happened, how his journey through Hollywood and into this new endeavor, and then just had some unbelievable filmmaking advice for up and coming filmmakers and just insight into the industry as a whole. I mean, these are conversations you can't find anywhere. So super excited for you guys to hear this, and excited to share this with you guys.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into our first official episode with Daryl Lefever.
Thank you so much for coming on. This is kind of our first stab at this podcast right now, and we are so excited about hearing your story and just talking, about the film industry, as a Christian, and just wanting to learn from you, and just can't wait to get into it. We have a little bit of a history with between doing the project for the documentary, and Garrett has known you in Redding. George, this is your first time meeting Daryl, but it'd be really interesting. I'd love to hear kind of like how you got to this point, if that makes sense. Like, how did you get into filmmaking? What was that like for you?
I got into filmmaking in the first place because I hated my job. I was working for a guy that I gave him an idea for a business, and I ended up running the business, which that part of it was fine. But he was actually a board member at my church, and so I thought it was going to be great. You know, this just amazing working with Christians and stuff. It's just going to be awesome. And I had set myself up. It was sort of like getting a golden retriever puppy. You know, I had set myself up. This was going to be this amazing experience. And anyway, it turned out to be kind of difficult, and it just wasn't awesome. And so I was hanging out with a friend of mine quite a bit late at night. I was married, and my wife was pregnant actually with our first child, and hanging out late at night and just complaining. And he said he got tired of listening to me complaining. So he said, well, what would you do if you could do anything? And I was 26 years old, and nobody had ever asked me that before. So I just said, I would make movies. Who wouldn't? Having never, ever once in my life thought about making movies before. Like, I loved going to movies, and I was really into it, and just watched a lot of movies, especially in the 80s growing up. You know, I was really into all the good movies back in the 80s. And he said, well, why don't you? And so all of a sudden I had a dream, you know, I had a passion, something I wanted to go do, and almost like a mission. And quit my job just after Jansen was born because we needed to have the health insurance. So I did that. And my only connection into film was I had a friend from high school that was studying film at Regent University down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And so we packed it up, and I went down there and interned on 3 student films for a summer. So I was working for free for people that were working for free, and just had no income. Just was like, I'm all in. And after I did those 3 films, which was mostly doing grip and lighting stuff on those films, which I loved. That was my first passion. I wanted to be a DP. That was my first kind of thing in the industry I wanted to do. And as you can see, you know how well lit I am here for our podcast. And I was just really into it. I loved it. And I went into a mini series. That's what we called them back then, mini series, that was shooting in Virginia Beach. There just happened to be. It was a Universal project, and I went into the production office and said, I'll do anything. And they gave me keys to a minivan, and I ran the film to the airport every day. Back when we used to shoot on, film, and which tells you it was, early 90s. And we ran the airport to Delta counter to counter every day out to North Hollywood, get it developed, and then picked up the print the next morning, from actually 2 days earlier, and picked up the print and ran it back for the director to watch the print, because that's how we used to make movies. He'd watch it like 2 days later. That was it. Wow. So, and then I was hooked. I was a lifer. So it's been 30 years now. I've been in film, and I think I'm good for another 20 or so. So that's me, and I love it.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just have a quick thought. I mean, because you said you started when you were 26, correct?
Yeah.
That's when you kind of have that first dream.
Right.
Someone who started a little bit later, or just didn't like you, that wasn't your dream coming up. Like, you didn't go to school in college or whatever, or, in your teenage years or whatever, but someone who got started a little bit later in it. I'm just curious what that experience like. Were you around other people who had been in it for a long time, and just, what was that transition like, going from kind of your mid 20s to now a whole new situation, and how fast did that kind of pick up? And I'm just curious about that, like what that experience was like.
Yeah, and I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is a pretty rural, my parents' house was surrounded on all 4 sides, literally, by Amish farms. So we would have teams of horses, planting corn and cutting tobacco and whatnot, so it was a very rural area. And my high school had 130 kids, my graduating class, so pretty small. And so, whenever you would talk to a guidance counselor about career, it was pretty much either you go to college and you become a teacher or an engineer, or you don't go to college and you become a plumber, electrician. Like, those were kind of the options around town. And so anything in entertainment just wasn't even thought of. I mean, it wasn't even
Sure.
it wasn't looked at as an industry. It wasn't looked at as something people go off and actually make a living doing. You just
Yeah, it was like a pipe dream.
Yeah, no, it wasn't even. Yeah, it wasn't even a dream. Like it just was not even an option. And so I didn't know anyone that worked in the industry, and so that's why when I wanted to take off on it, right, it was like my literal only connection was a friend of mine who was studying film. Actually wasn't even technically studying film. He's studying communications because he wanted to be an actor. But he's studying communications and acting at Regent University. So yeah, it was super unrelated to anything I had known in my past, and started off at the bottom. Obviously, like I say, my first job was driving a minivan, but then after that, moved out to LA. And through some friends and stuff that I'd made on that show in Virginia Beach, moved to LA, got my first job as an office PA, and kind of worked my way up through that. And it was being older was unique. Like most of the other office PAs were probably fresh out of film school, so they were like 22, 23. I was 26, married, and had a kid. So it was just even those 4 years just make a big difference in life, right? And I do remember our first apartment in LA, which is going to sound super cheap now, but it was like $825 a month, and I was making $350 a week. So things were certainly super tight. My wife did work to help out, and she actually worked part-time. She worked like 30 hours a week, and she made more than I did working 70 hours a week. So that's how we kind of made ends meet at the beginning. Because back then, actually just was talking to a friend about this recently, back then as a PA, like it was just understood that you only put so many hours on your time card, even though you worked like 16 hours. Like that was just the industry. Like, well, if you want a job, then you put down that you only work, 10 hours and you just stay here until we tell you to go home. And nobody questioned it. That was just how you did the job. If you wanted it, that's what you got. And you were essentially on salary, So yeah, things have definitely changed. Because PAs now are making over $1,000 a week and they get overtime. So it's kind of a different world, but so it's, and then I got into that, and then honestly, I had accounting experience from working with my dad before I even was working for the friend at the job I didn't like, and I was working as a PA, so I was working like 6, 7 a.m. to 9 o'clock at night. And these accountants would come in at like 9 and leave at 6:30. I was like, wait a second, like I know how to do that. I think this seems like a better career choice. So I went into the accountant and said, hey, I think I could learn how to do this pretty quickly because I have some accounting experience. And I literally went from being an office PA on Friday to being the post accountant all by myself on Monday morning. And that's how I got into I got into accounting, and it did that for about 12 years, and then got into producing.
Wow.
So somewhere around there. So but always wanted to produce. Well, after I wanted to be a DP, the next thing I wanted to do was produce. So felt very blessed to have that track, and even coming up through accounting was great while my kids were little, because I got to be home, when they would go to bed. And I was, there in the morning. So, it wasn't like working set hours where you're working till, 2 o'clock in the morning and trying to sleep till noon. So it was great. I mean, I feel like God just really kind of had his hand in it the whole way through. So it was really a positive experience for me.
Speaking of accounting, if you could talk about some of the projects you were working on and what that entailed as your role, because I know just some of the conversations we've had in the past of just kind of breaking down budgets for like shooting in different states and all that stuff. Yeah. So if you could kind of talk about some of the films and what that role entailed, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
I was really fortunate. I guess blessed is the better word for it. I was in LA, and right away I got on an NBC miniseries as an office PA, and then I did 3 of those NBC miniseries. Now they call them limited series, but same thing. And and got into accounting. And then my very next project, which would been, like I say, would probably be within a year of being in LA, was called Up Close and Personal. It was a feature, and it was with Michelle Pfeiffer and Robert Redford, right? Which has gone back a ways, but it was like, I didn't realize at the time, like I was 1 year in LA and I'm working on a feature with Robert Redford, Michelle Pfeiffer. I just thought everybody did that. Everybody, if you want to be in the film industry, surely you just move to LA and work on giant, studio features. And I did that I ended up staying in those kind of features, mostly at Warner Brothers, but I did Disney. I did Mighty Joe Young at Disney. I did That Thing You Do, which was Fox. X-Men was Fox. Polar Express was back at Warner Brothers. I just did Where the Wild Things Are was also Warner Brothers. I just got to work on these huge studio features, which was really an awesome experience for me. I mean, I've learned so much, and I really even just remember continually asking the Lord, like, but when do I get to make stuff that honors you? Because I'm working on these films that, looking back, like retrospectively, it's amazing. They're all like family-friendly films, right? Like Polar Express and stuff. Like there's all stuff that was great. And I hadn't thought about it at the time until I was offered one but it wasn't quite in that family of films. But I just, I kept asking the Lord, like, when do I get to work on stuff that honors you? And I felt like he kept saying, Daryl, like, I've got you working with the biggest studio in the world on their biggest projects with the #1 producers in the world. Like, maybe let me handle this, like maybe like go with my plan. Like, it's, like, have some patience and like stick with my plan. And so I was like, okay, Lord. Yeah. So, and then ultimately I was at a conference down in Australia, working on a film there. And I felt like the Lord finally said, I asked again. I was like, Lord, when do I get to go work on projects that honor you? And I felt like the Lord said, I release you to go do that. But I want you to, but the qualifier is, I want you to let the world know that I'm good. Like, I want you to tell stories that lets the world know that I'm good. So yeah, that was kind of the final transition. It was like, okay, now go do that, which was funny because then I came back to America and I was like, yay, I get to work on projects that honor the Lord and let the world know that he's good. And then I kind of had this really quick realization, like, I don't know anybody that makes films like that. I don't know that they exist. Like, who's doing that? Like, who's making, because there was no faith-based film industry, back then. This is like 2006. Yeah, there just wasn't really. I mean, The Cross and the Switchblade was like in the 70s, it had been 30 years and nobody had made, a movie like that. So I kind of got in the very bottom of when that started to become an industry. So, or a genre, I should say, within an industry.
Man, that's amazing, Daryl. I think it's so interesting to hear you talk about your trajectory and how you came up. Just looking at your credit list, some of these movies that you were on were basically my childhood, right? Like, Mighty Joe Young, I watched it a million times, right? Talking about George of the Jungle. Yep. Polar Express, we still watch that with our kids every Christmas. I mean, it's like you got to be a part of culture defining movies in Hollywood at that, in that juncture where you were at. And then you talked about how the Lord brought you through and into a new season where now you kind of helped pioneer what we now call faith-based movies, right? And, it's interesting. Have you thought about that impact, and then just kind of how, like, where that is going now? I feel like there's, you said that there was no, there was no precipice for, faith-based movies at the time when you came in. You guys are just, hey, let's try this new thing. And now it's kind of become like, okay, we know there's almost like a formula, or there's like a way now that we know, okay, now that's a faith-based movie, that kind of a thing. Do you, first off, I think that's unbelievable what you guys have been able to accomplish. And then I'd love to just talk about, like, where you see kind of that going, what you're working on now and where, right, and what where you see it going.
Yeah, fortunately, I think I think what's happening is kind of what we'd all hoped would happen. which is the term would become broader and broader and broader, right? I mean, like Sound of Freedom is being considered a faith-based movie, right? But if it wasn't released by Christians and if it hadn't been marketed to Christians, nobody would look at that movie as a faith-based movie, right? Like because it's no more a faith-based movie than a movie like True Grit, right? Like there's one or two sort of lines in the entire film that reference even there being a God, right? Like it's really,
Right.
I mean, there's nothing about that movie that would say, I mean, it's obviously, it's about something that Christians are passionate about, right? Like saving children, right? But lots of people are passionate about that, right? You don't have to be a Christian to be against trafficking children, right? So I think it's interesting that the genre, if you will, is broadening. And like we have a film coming out in October called Ordinary Angels, and it's definitely faith adjacent. Like it's, it doesn't have strong faith messages in it. There's a couple church scenes. There's a really poignant scene by a grave where the daughter talks with the dad about, hey, it's okay to be angry at God, but you should still talk to him. So there's a few, and that's in the trailer, so I'm not giving a lot away, but there's a few sweet moments like that. But it's really just a story about a woman who's not even a believer, who just wants to help a little girl that has needs a liver transplant and is dying, and so she raises awareness and raises money and stuff, and so it's a powerful story, it's a poignant story, it's an emotional story, and it's being marketed through Kingdoms of Faith. Obviously unabashedly we make faith-based films, and we're super proud of it, but it wouldn't fit the narrative of, say, 5 years ago, what you had to have to be a Christian film. And even Jesus Revolution, right? Like there's things in Jesus Revolution, which I'm hoping y'all saw, but there's things in Jesus Revolution that you wouldn't have put in one of our films 5 years ago, right? I mean, I think there's 3 drug scenes. Well, if you include, alcohol, like there's at least 3 scenes with drugs and alcohol. There's the guy on stage. Oh my gosh, I can't think of his name. The guy that was really popular back in the 70s that had a huge following. The guy that says, tune in, drop out. He literally says, you are your own God. And we make up the rules, right, on stage, and he's, his whole face in the camera. And you wouldn't have had that in a movie, that was called a faith-based movie even 5 years ago, I don't think. But I think it's good. Like, I think being able to contrast, right? It's like if you can't show light and darkness and the light wins, right? Like, it's kind of hard to tell a lot of conflict in stories. So I feel like the things that we're the subjects that we're sort of able to delve into and reach and tell stories about is broadening, and none of us are interested in doing something that obviously is graphic or is inappropriate or whatever. But I think that it's I think it's becoming a broader term. In fact, it might even need to change a little bit. I don't know if we'll end up calling it something different within a couple of years, rather than calling them Christian films or whatever. But I think it's good to be able to explore stories that touch people and explore stories that people that don't necessarily identify as Christian will want to watch, right? Because that's part of the mission, right? Is to share Christ with the world, right? And the gospel is good news. So if nobody wants to listen to your news, it's kind of hard to say you're spreading it, right? I think it's a good thing. I think it's good that we're broadening the term, so to speak, and hopefully it continues.
Yeah, I would love to camp out here for a second if we can. I love this. So Daryl, I feel like there's kind of a lot of like rhetoric around that the term faith-based film or faith-based industry, right? Even kind of within like churches, you hear there's like a lot of jokes that get kind of tossed around side, or people will kind of make and I'm not like bashing them, but they'll be like, oh no, the God's not dead. Like, these kind of these, right. They have these tropes about this phrase, faith-based films, faith-based industry. Since you're someone who's in it, and have really been in it since the beginning. I'm just curious if you'd be like, how would you describe the industry? How would you, some stuff that you're saying to me is so interesting. You talked about how you feel like it kind of started around 2006, right? So you have you have such an experience with it that I think none of us, or most people don't really have. And so I know you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but I would just love to talk about just the arc, where you see, some of the influences of it. Who are the gatekeepers? You talked about it might be changing kind of down the road. Like, I'm just curious, your experience in it. What do you see? Do you see those tropes? Do they bother you when people say that? Like, I know there's a lot there, but I'm just curious about some of the rhetoric around it. Like, do you find that to be beneficial or hurtful, or what's your kind of thoughts on the faith-based industry and how you would describe it?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about the gatekeepers, because that is really interesting, especially when you consider Sound of Freedom. Like, that was independently financed, right? And released through Angel Studios directly. Like, it did not go through, it wasn't like Angel Studios is a subset of, Paramount or Universal or whatever. Like, they just directly released it to Regal and AMC and Cinemark and whatnot. And so the whole gatekeeper concept is shifting quite a bit, right? Which is fantastic for filmmaking, because it used to be, you go back even a couple of years, right? Like, unless you could get your film distributed by one of the big distributors, or even a smaller independent distributor, it was never going to see the light of day, right? It was never going to happen. Yeah. And super difficult, because they've got their slates years out, and they have their producers and directors that have deals, right, that are a lot of times on the lot, right? Like, if it's Universal or something, they have offices on the lot, so they're going to get their films out first, because they're paying for their overhead. So they're going to obviously give precedence to them. So it's super difficult to get a film out in theaters. So I think that alone, like that aspect of it, the fact that there's a possibility of getting a film into theaters that doesn't have to be greenlit by a major studio, is going to change stories as well. Like, just that fact will change the kind of stories we can tell. As far as where it's going, it's going to be interesting as well, because how they've been saying for years. Ever since the VCR came out, right? The blinking clock on your VCR came out. They've been saying that your theater is going to die, because people can now watch movies at home, right? And then HBO and Showtime started showing movies not that long after they were in theaters, right? And so that was going to be the end of theatrical distribution. It's just always, everything's going to be the end of it. But I feel like COVID did really shift things quite a bit, because not only could you not go to the theater because you weren't allowed, but then even for a year after that, there was nothing to see, right? Because we couldn't make films for a year. So like, there was a year, another year. So it's 2 whole years of not people getting out of the routine, I should say, of going to the theater, right? Mm-hmm. Even myself, like, I love movies. And I used to know what movies are coming out every weekend for months, like, I knew everything was coming out, and I knew what I wanted to go see. And the summertime was actually kind of anxious, because I was like, oh my gosh, well, I have to see this one, I have to see that one. They're both on the same weekend. What am I going to do? Like, you just had all this anxiety about making sure you saw all these films. And now I have to be reminded, like, oh yeah, that's right. That movie's still coming out, right? That's still coming out this year. So I feel like people have gotten out of the sync. So I guess my point I'm making is that I feel like it has to feel even more like an event film. Like, it has to feel like something that is going to do that you definitely got to see in the theater now. And in order for it to, so you have that fear of missing out, I feel like more and more and more, the movies that are going to be successful are films that, for one reason or another, it may not necessarily be because you feel like you have to see it on a big screen because of his epicness. Like, that might be some of it. That might be an aspect, because it's an epic film and I don't want to watch it at home, even though I have a, 65, 72 inch screen at home. Like, it just might be something I still want to experience the sound and stuff in a big, like Oppenheimer, right? You want to see that on a big screen. It's this huge film and you want to go see it. But then Barbie, like, you can watch Barbie on your phone, like, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I'm sure that people have different opinions about it, but it's like, I don't need to go see Barbie on a big screen. But I think it's the number one box office Warner Brothers has ever had. We're talking about a studio that had, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter,
Wow.
So yeah, domestic box office anyway. So yeah, that's incredible. Right. It's crazy. But somehow there was a fear of missing out, right? Because it was such a cultural thing,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, I got to go see it because everybody's talking about it, and I got to be able to talk about it too.
Yeah.
Somehow we talk about it a lot here. John Irwin talks about it a lot, about movies have to feel like events for one reason or another, whether it's because it's epic or because it's part of the cultural conversation or whatever. And I think even more so, it used to be that, not that I'm promoting R-rated comedies, but it used to be that R-rated comedies did really well in the summertime, right? Well, this summer we've had Joyride and No Hard Feelings, right? Both of them were, on their own. If you like R-rated comedies, I didn't see either of them, but apparently they actually are funny, right? They're movies that normally would have done well in a summertime where people are going to theaters, and both of them did really poorly, which I think further illustrates that if people can say, I could see that on Amazon in 3 months or whatever, I don't really care, and they'll probably watch it on Amazon. So I think it's gonna make it. It's going to make it a more delicate decision as to what gets a theatrical release and what studios or even independents are willing to spend money on. Because if you don't get that theatrical release, then it's really hard to make money back on something that's anywhere north of $10 million or $15 million. If you don't get that theatrical release, it's really tough to go and just try to shop it around to a streamer and get your money back. They're willing to spend way more than that on their own originals, but as far as just buying something that you've made, it's a tough sell. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think a lot of things are going to change in the next couple of years as to what gets a theatrical release and how many releases there are and all that. Or who knows? It could be that everybody's still getting over the COVID thing, and a year from now I could be dead wrong, and people are going back to watch everything every weekend, and art house films are doing great again. And you can make a movie as an art house film, and people go see it. And that'd be that would be amazing. I hope that happens. But I just feel like there's a shift happening that people are have become more comfortable, or more, I should say, satisfied with watching a movie at home. So maybe you guys can tell me if you agree or not. If your experience is the same, like even if you haven't thought about it, do you feel the same way? You're like, I got a big screen at home, I can watch that at home. But or if you're still like every weekend, like, no, we got to see it. Of course, I know at least two of you have kids, so it's
totally different season for us.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think going to a movie now, it's like it needs to be a theatrical experience for me to spend the time to go to the movie theater, and or just something to rally behind. I think like Jesus Revolution, Sound of Freedom. I think there was a rally that people wanted to get behind, because like Sound of Freedom, it's not a movie that you necessarily needed to see in the movie theater, but I think people wanted to get behind the cause and support it. And but I think for me, it's definitely, if outside of that, it's going to a movie, I want it to feel like a theatrical experience versus just a comedy or whatever. It's like I wouldn't really spend the money to go to the movie for that.
Well, it also feels like there's such a contrast right now of, like, those movies in particular were so contrasted to what has been coming out, right? Like there's such a barrage of dark entertainment or different types of movies that just didn't have those subject matter. And it feels like there's such a want and need for kind of wholesome content. You look at, like, just take Mario Brothers, for instance, and the way that was received in theaters, versus other similar types of movies that came out, but that maybe weren't, as, family friendly, if that makes sense. And so I think it's an interesting topic. I mean, it's interesting to hear as filmmakers, as, people who I think, all three of us, Daryl, are developing our own scripts, developing our own stories and ideas of what we would love to see, done. And I think it's it'll be interesting down the road to see how, us as young filmmakers coming up in the industry, one, get funding, and to find what kind of distribution we get to find, and how those things get seen. Because as of right now, it does feel like there's kind of a, either not really a monopoly, but there are gatekeepers, and it is a hard road to try to, make these type of films. So yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation for that. It does seem like the audience though is wanting more and more of this type of content, and I feel like also George, you touched on it, like the quality level of faith-based films was talked about a lot in the beginning days, right? Like, it was always like, well, that's not real film because it was, you know what I mean? It's that whole narrative, right?
Yeah.
But I have a plane going over me if you can hear that. Sorry about that. I'll wait for it to pass actually here in just a second, and then I'll finish my point.
Where are you now?
There it is. So my point of this is that so that quality level, was kind of laughed at. And I feel like, Daryl, what you and the Irwin brothers and other filmmakers have done in this space is kind of destroyed that narrative, right? Like, you've actually been able to bring good quality, well done story to the faith-based market. It's just such an amazing accomplishment for guys like me and Garrett and George who want to, who we have dreams of making, super quality films within this, this type of space. And I don't know, could you talk about that journey a little bit, just about like what, how you guys have come through and what you've been pioneering for? And even just like every film seems to be getting better and better in the way that you're telling the stories. And, and then what kind of pathway do you see for young filmmakers like us who want to continue on that path?
Yeah, a lot of it does, as sad as it sounds, a lot of it does have to do with budgets, right? Like we've as films are successful, then people or studios like Lionsgate are willing to invest, more and more in the projects, which means you get to up the quality of the cast, right? Which is a huge issue. And you get to up your camera package and your lenses, right? The lenses we shot American Underdog on were, a lot of them were from the 70s, and like the outside of the cases from Panavision had like Raiders and Star Wars, like all these like films that you're like, these lenses were used on these, it's like,
no way.
So they were amazing glass, right? It was just like stunning looking stuff. So we couldn't have afforded that before, and even just, lighting crews and, everything. So that all does help. Although that's separate from storytelling, right? Like that's not necessarily the same thing, right? But just from a production point of view, we were able to make it look like a real movie, right? Because the thing was that it was not a real movie. It doesn't look like a real movie. And so when we were able to start making movies that look like real movies, because that's actually super important to me. Like that, I'm not a technical guy. Like I'm not into like the specifics of HDR and SDR and 1080p and all those guys. It's not my world. Like it's not my thing. Like but I can still look at something and go, yeah, that looks like a soap opera. That looks, whatever. Like it just, right. You just know, like just inherently, when it's anamorphic or not, or if it's good lighting or bad lighting or whatever. You just know. Like you just look at it.
Sure.
I think some people actually don't care. Which to me is like, how do you not care? Like it's so important to me. And then Jordan's nodding his head like, yes, I remember it well, that Daryl does care what it looks like. But yeah, it's really important to me. And so I feel like we've especially been able to increase that, right? Which also a lot of that has to do with, as you guys know too, is just the equipment, the accessibility to cameras that make things look better. The cost of that has come down and down and down. I remember when Sony Genesis was a thing, and you were paying more for that, back in kind of early kind of 2008, 2010, like you were paying more for that than you were just a regular Panavision camera, right? It was crazy expensive to shoot digital. Well, now that's all shifted, right? Now you can shoot it on your phone. So it's amazing the difference that the camera quality has made. And so there's that. But I do think I think too, it has to do with not feeling like we were talking before about being able to broaden the genre or whatever, or the subset sort of thing. Like, if when you're able to explore stories that have more conflict in them or more challenge in them, or really show emotions more about something, like, and show people, express people's feelings and how they respond, like how people in the real world respond to things, or are challenged by them or whatever, like that just makes for a better story, right? It just makes for better stories to tell and better acting and all that, rather than having to feel like you're constantly like, well, we can't do that, we can't say that, we can't cross that line, and again, not that any of us are looking to be gratuitous or do something ridiculous, but it's just like being able to be able to hit subject matters that you couldn't have hit before.
Right.
I think is important. I think it'll bring it a long way. And yeah, then as far as young filmmakers, I mean, it's still hard. You're for sure right. It's still super hard. I'm hoping that that some things change here from either a streaming point of view or whatever. I mean, I feel like some of the bigger companies are starting to see, especially with the success of Sound of Freedom, and Jesus Red. They're starting to see there is a market there that's not just a one-off market. Like they really do want to be served. Because if we can sort of crack into that world of getting paid to make originals for streamers and stuff that are clearly for an audience that doesn't want to be offended by things, no matter what it is. I keep thinking of it's like Bluey. I'm sure some of you guys have kids. You know what Bluey is, right? The dog from Australia, right? It's like that's made by the Australian Broadcasting Network. It's like it's not a faith-based thing. Like there's no whatever. I mean, you watch it and you think sometimes like somebody on this thing has to be a believer. Did I lose you guys? You still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
No, we're here.
Oh, okay. You all went blank on my screen. Not sure why. I can't see any of you now. But yeah, like so when I think about my I know I don't look old enough to have grandkids, right? But my grandkids were just here and visiting, and so Bluey was on all the time, right? Where Bluey is just their favorite show, and it's just crazy to think about. Like that show is so successful. But it's successful. I mean, it's cute and it's funny and it's whatever. But it's successful because parents feel like they can just turn it on and don't have to worry about it, right? Like it's okay if my kid watches an episode of Bluey because nothing on there is going to be offensive or be something I need to explain later or whatever. I just think that there's going to be more and more demand for stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
Are we still off? Oh, sorry, just real quick. Are we still blank for you, Daryl?
Yeah. You have you're flashing red lights that you're still recording, but there's no video. Yeah.
Might be a bandwidth thing on your end.
I don't know. Yeah. It says I'm 99. I'm at 99%. I don't know. 99%.
Right, yeah, that's uploading, so it's constantly uploading in the background.
Yeah. I can see George again. So, okay.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah, it'll
come back. Yeah.
Yeah.
No worries. What are you going to say, Garrett?
Yeah, sorry, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just a compliment to you, Daryl. I mean, the movies that you're making, I think you do such a good job of, like you said, just kind of bringing in the authenticity of just real life and just the struggles and the dark sides of life, but also bringing in the light and hope. And Jesus Revolution, I cried like 5 times during that movie. And I think it just was to me, it was such a, just an amazing, parallel to society today, to what was happening in the 70s and how you guys portrayed that. So, I think, and I think the movies that you're making are also very culturally relevant with what's happening today in today's world. So as you're kind of looking at movies and scripts that are, I'm sure you guys have scripts coming your way every day. What types of stories are you guys looking for? Are you guys writing your own stories? Are you guys getting a bunch of scripts to you? And what are you guys looking for in a story?
Yeah, I definitely want to give credit to John Irwin and Brent McCorkle for Jesus Revolution. I mean, they championed that thing and even though John and Brent come at things from a different angles, like they both fought for what they felt was important. And the end result, I think, was a result of them doing that, being directors that really, really fought for what was important to them. So it's I don't want to take too much credit for, I love having input in the edit and in the script and whatnot, but I would definitely give all the credit to John and Brent for how that turned out. But as far as stuff we're looking, we have actually several projects that are technically greenlit with Lionsgate as our partner. But the writer's strike is kind of killing us right now. So writers and actors strike, for that matter. Because we have a film that I'm supposed to be leaving here in 2 weeks to go to Dallas to start filming in November, start prep in September and film in November. And wow. We just don't know. We're not sure if we're going to be able to get her done, which is a bummer. We'd end up employing 150 people there in Dallas just for the production, plus extras and actors and everybody else. But as far as crew, so love to be able to get back to work and get going. So we're waiting to get back on track, and a couple of our scripts or a couple of our projects are waiting on scripts too. So we're waiting for the Writers Guild to come back to work. So. Yeah. But
when scripts kind of come in, what are you guys looking for? Is it purely story, message, cultural themes? What are the types of things you're looking for?
Yeah, so Kingdom Story Company is kind of based on the idea of telling true stories. I don't think that. I mean, we certainly are open to not doing, telling fictional stories. So I'm sure that'll evolve at some point, or maybe stories loosely based on historical characters or something. So that's mainly what we look for. It's true stories that really show a real arc of someone redemption and struggle and overcoming and those sorts of things, which is like Ordinary Angels, like I mentioned. It comes out in October. This little girl's dying needs a liver transplant, and the what the family goes through and what this woman goes through to raise money and pay off her medical bills and get her on a plane to get a transplant in the middle of this blizzard, and just all those kind of the triumph of that. And it's mostly stories like that. And somewhere along the line, for us, just because we do tell faith stories, somewhere along the line there has to be some sort of element of how their faith got them through that, or like in Jizrev, I mean, that was it was kind of unbelievable to me that we actually pulled off a salvation, in the middle of the movie, he gets saved, and you're like, I never thought we could pull that off and have it look authentic or look, not cheesy or whatever. But it was like, wait a second, you literally are watching the film, and when he gets dunked in the water, you're like, wait a second, he just got saved. Like, that guy just accepted Christ, right? Like that just happened on screen, and it didn't feel cheesy at all. I actually love that moment in the movie. Stories like that, transformational stories. That's mostly what we're looking for. I mean, I'd love to see us someday want to make, Westerns, and I want to make a movie about St. Patrick. It's like there's all kinds of movies that I'd like to see us get into. Historical fiction. Sci-fi, yeah. Sci-fi's tough. Sci-fi's tough. But it's tough to do without I guess it depends on what you call sci-fi. But if it involves other planets, it's pretty tough to do without a decent budget, a really good budget.
Big budget.
Yeah. But obviously there is sci-fi that doesn't necessarily require that. But because. So
Daryl, I mean, I know you talked about the writer strike and the and the actor strike and how that's kind of affecting you guys. And I know you guys are partnered with Lionsgate. It seems like you have an amazing relationship with them and that you've built trust over the last couple movies. Obviously those type of relationships are going to be very few and far between Christian directors and studios. Do you find that is there a better moment in time right now for, like, let's say, private investors and things like that to kind of get involved with other creatives who are looking to make these stories? I would see that, the problem obviously is distribution that we're talking about, but like, how do you, what would you say to one of us, who obviously, we don't have a deal with Lionsgate, but we're looking to get something made. What would be your advice for that?
It's a great question. Because it's no matter what, raising money is hard. I think it's the hardest part of the whole process. I mean, and so I've been with Kevin Downs for 15 years, and Kevin's, really keeps that relationship. And we have a Brandon Gregory here at Kingdom, but they really keep that relationship with Lionsgate going. I deal with Lionsgate more on a production level, not on a like president of Lionsgate kind of level. So yeah, I mean, we're super fortunate, obviously, as a company to have that relationship, because having distribution just right there, right? Like that they are the distributor and they finance the film, so they want to see it succeed, and so it's a great partnership. But independently, I mean, I think that things like the movies we're talking about, like Sound of Freedom and whatnot, like show that there's clearly a market. And I really feel like if we can, like I'm saying, if the streamer market opens up a little bit more to some kind of faith entertainment, no matter what that means, like I said, the term is broadening, but whatever that means, like if because it is hard, especially hard to raise money if you don't have distribution up front, right? Like it's really, really, really difficult. And we did do it with Woodlawn and I Can Only Imagine. Like both those movies, we raised the money, made the film, cut the film together, and then shopped it around.
Was that a scary process?
Super scary, especially because we were still raising on both those films. We were still raising money as we were shooting, which is a horrible place to be. Like really, really awful. I mean, we could always make the previous week's payroll. Actually, I've made three movies. I made 3 movies that way. So we could always make payroll, and we're always super honest with the crew. Like, hey, like we got you this week, but we're still raising money for next week.
Man. And
I actually had 4 movies because I did one with Jordan like that as well. So I actually have done 4 movies that way. Man. But super, super stressful. But so yeah, it's not something I would advise anybody to go do. But and on Woodlawn, unfortunately, even though I think it's a great film, I think Woodlawn's really an awesome film. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's a really good. It's a football film set in the 70s, racial tension. Yeah. Like it's really, really powerful film, I think. But it wasn't marketed great. And so we didn't end up making our money back on that one. But on I Can Only Imagine, obviously we did. I mean, obviously I Can Only Imagine was a huge hit. And all the investors in that were very happy. So yeah, so all that to say, it's so tough though to go out and raise funds, even though we've done it, and you can do it without knowing where your distributor is from the start. So I would really recommend knowing, at least having a place for it to land, even if it's like a backup situation or something, somewhere where it's gonna go. Because really at this point, I think it'd be even harder now to just go out and raise like $10 million to make a movie. In a post-COVID world, I think it'd be really hard to do that. But if you can at least know somewhere that it's going, that'll help. I mean, unless it's really missional, so like people feel like even if I don't get my money back, at least I know that this is happening. And I did do a movie like that too, where people knew that they might not get their money back, but they were just so wanted to be a part of it because it was a pro-life film and they really want to be a part of it. So yeah, it's hard. I wish I had some kind of like, well, if you follow these 3 rules, like you'll get there. You'll raise your money and you'll have distribution, because there isn't one. yeah, anybody tells you there is probably making it up. Cause it's super hard. But
I'm curious, kind of one more this question again on this the industry, the faith-based industry, however we want to frame that. But do you find like how important would you say it is to for us as a whole to try and create buy-in in the industry? Like you think of kind of, again, the traditional film industry, or what do you want to call it? But like, there's stuff like there's a lot of film festivals. There's a lot of kind of different ways to off ramp or onboard into that industry. There's a lot of different, it's a really robust industry, right? There's lots of jobs. There's lots of, again, ways to get in. And so obviously the faith-based industry is kind of a newer thing. It's growing. And we want to, get new fresh talent in there. We want to be able to, again, hopefully see it grow in streaming and other ways, the way that kind of traditional film or TV shows have been. How do we do that? How do we create buy-in? How do we get it to grow to where, people can make a living, not just, the producers and directors, but, the gaffers and the ACs and all the different things that make the industry kind of flourish and stand up on its own. How can we do that? How can we do that? Is that something we need churches to buy into? Is that something we need, investors? Like how do we get that to kind of fatten up a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you like, when it comes to crew, I mean, you can get on The Chosen if you can, right? that's awesome. Like I know a lot of people that work on The Chosen and they work not quite year round, but it's like any other TV show, right? They go on hiatus and they go back to The Chosen again. So I have several friends that are, especially camera guys, that are on that works out great. And I'm super happy for them and super happy for Dallas for the success of that. But I think it'd be really tough to say that as of right now, there's all depends what you do. Like there's some first ADs and stuff that can stay pretty busy working just on faith-based stuff. But as a crew member, you're probably not going to be able to only work on faith-based stuff, right? Like we're just not there yet to where you could be constantly busy just doing that. So really, to me, it's more about how do you work on, like, how do you hone your skill on stuff that is even bigger budget? Like I have friends that are gaffers and stuff on some of our projects because they still are in the big broad scope of things. To us, they're not low budget, but they're still low budget. If they're even under 25 million, it's still considered a low budget movie, right? So even if we're doing a $15 million movie or something, they might be a gaffer in our film, but they're not too prideful or precious to go to Atlanta and be a rigging electrician, on some giant Marvel film. And even though, it's not the job they really want to do because they really want to be the gaffer, they're not only employed and providing for their family, but they're also still learning a ton, right? Like you go on these giant films and they're, just the setups that they have, the lighting setups and stuff. And so, and then they get to bring that, that education, right? What they just learned back to and put their gaffer hat back on. And now all of a sudden we have a dimmer op, on our set, and we've never had a dimmer op before. But all of a sudden, wow, look at this! We can dim lights from hundreds of feet away. It's like amazing. It's like we're I think that there's something there about continuing to learn, on bigger projects and not being afraid to do that. You got to do whatever God's called you to do, right? Like I'm certainly not going to step on somebody and say, well, this is what you should do for your career. But just from what I've witnessed, you just got to be willing to, still work on whatever you can learn on and whatever you can just continue to hone your craft on. I'm certainly not saying that you work on everything that comes by and you get a job offer for, but that's between you and the Lord as to what films you feel like you should be a part of and have your name in the credits on. I've certainly gone through that myself. Yeah. But I do think that there's a lot to just providing for your family, because I have known people that, well, I'm a this or I'm a that. And so unless I get hired as that, then I'm not working. And I'm like, wow, dude, like that's a tough way to pay your mortgage. It's like sometimes you just gotta provide, it's like, or I only work on projects that are this big or whatever, it's like sometimes you just got to go out and do it. And I find that sometimes smaller projects are super fun. Like it's just so it's like I love the big movies with the big setups and the huge base camps and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really great to have 7-8 people out there shooting something, and everybody's in it for the right reason, and everybody's just grabbing stuff and carrying stuff. And I mean, Jordan knows I'll pick up a case and carry it out of the van and bring it in. It's just like, what do you need me to do? Like, I'll pick it up and carry it. It's like, it's because it's just, we're all in this together and we're all trying to make the best project we can. And I end up putting on a set dressing hat sometimes and going back and like, let's tweak this background and make it look a little, whatever, like move this vase 5 inches and it'll look better, not look like it's coming out of his ear or whatever, just stuff to just like help out. And so that can be really fun.
Totally.
I was going to ask, I think kind of going off of that, I think a lot of us in the film industry aren't necessarily working on faith-based films. And I know for you, working on all the blockbusters and working directly in Hollywood and in the industry, what did it look like for you to really kind of hold on to your faith and be a light in the industry? And because I think a lot of Christians are scared to be in the film industry because I've just had different conversations with people of like, they don't feel like they can hold on to their morals or whatever it is. Yeah. So what did it look like for you to be a Christian in this industry? And
like I say, I felt really, really blessed that I got to work on all these family friendly things and hadn't really thought about it until actually right when I was kind of making the transition, because I would go do, because when Kevin and I first got started, they were really low budget, under $1 million, and I'd get paid like nothing, practically. I get paid like maybe 2 weeks of my normal salary to work for 3 months or something. I couldn't afford to do that. So then I would go back and work on something for Warner Brothers for 6 months and then get cashed up again. And then I go back and do a movie with Kevin, and, and you make these little movies and practically for free. And so, during that time, towards the end of it was the first time I got offered a film that, I just all of a sudden had to question it. And it was called Queen of the Damned. Anyway, it's gone back a ways. It was Rice. What's the name? What's that author's name? Rice. Anyway, she wrote Interview with the Vampire and all those kind of movies. Anyway, so and I didn't know anything about it, but just it just didn't sound like a really great project. So I'm interviewing with the producer, my executive at Warner Brothers that would put me on film. She said, "Oh, go meet with the producer." So I went to her house and met, and like an interview kind of thing. And I said, I'm not familiar with this story. What it's about. She goes, "Oh, it's great. It's a story about how the Queen of Hell is looking for a mate so that she can create a Prince of Hell. So she goes to a goth concert. And during the concert, she causes an earthquake, which opens up the ground, and all the concert goers fall into hell. So then she goes on stage and she mates with the lead singer, and she gets pregnant. And then she has a boy, and he becomes the Prince of Hell." I'm like, I'm not familiar with that story. So I went home and I was like telling my wife, like, okay, like this is the first time, like I've been doing this at that point, probably, 15 years. And this is the first time, that it's not Mighty Joe Young or George of the Jungle or whatever, like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, this is really weird. And it was a huge promotion for me. It was a big step up. It was an awesome opportunity. And the film was going to be filmed in Australia. So I was like, this would be so great. Like, take my family to Australia, because we would travel as a family. My kids were homeschooled, and we would just travel all over the world. That's awesome. And I was like, go to Australia, and just awesome experience and more money and everything. And so I called a pastor friend of mine that we had known for a long time that I really respected. And he grew up in Hollywood. Like he was super familiar with people in the industry and everything, even though he didn't work in the industry. And I said, Jonathan, like, what am I going to do here? This is really weird. And he said, look, Daryl, he said, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't go work on that movie, but I am going to tell you that if you do go work on that movie, you're putting yourself under the authority of people that want to make that movie. And that really hit me. It was like, okay, so because when an accountant's on a movie, like it's like a 9-month commitment on these big movies. It's not like I was on X-Men for 11 months. These are big commitments. It's not just like, gone for a couple of days. And I was like, do I really want to be under the authority of people that want to make a movie like that? That was so obviously anti-God and so obviously just like not God honoring. And so I went back into it. Now this is going back a little ways. This is going back, 15 years. So the industry has shifted some, but, I went back to my boss at Warner Brothers and I was like, I really just don't feel comfortable working on this. I have my name on it forever. It's just not something that I feel good about. And I went into the meeting with a lot of trepidation because I even though I'd been there a while, I'd been there like 8 years. I really thought they might say, well, if you don't want to work on our movies, I guess you can go work on somebody else's, And instead the response I got was, oh, you actually care about the projects you work on. I said, yeah, I do. It means a lot to me. And he said, well, let's find you something else then. And so it was awesome. Like it couldn't have been a better response. And then as a result of that, I got to go work on Where the Wild Things Are, which was an amazing experience.
That's
amazing experience for my family. We went to this church down there called Planet Shakers, and our whole family came alive spiritually. It was the first time I heard of Bill Johnson and Bethel and whatnot. Like I didn't even know that existed before. I actually found out about, all that through going to this church in Australia. And, like it was just the best experience. Like it was super, super awesome experience. The film turned out to be fun and, working on it was fun. And it was all good. It was so great. So I come back after that experience in Australia and like a year and a half later, I'm in this conference room where we would all sit to work on budgets in between films. Like Warner Brothers would give us give us scripts to read and say, here, build a budget based on this script and see if we can make it. And then you'd shop it around different states to see which rebate worked best and stuff. And so I'm in this conference room and there's this other accountant there and she's going on and on about this horrible film she worked on. And and I said, and she said it was in Australia and the offices didn't have air conditioning, didn't have heat. The hotels were terrible. The producer was such a jerk. I mean, it was just this horrible, horrible experience. And she said, I'd never go back there again. And I said, well, what film was it? And of course, it's Queen the Damned.
Wow.
So it was just this, this awesome experience that I got. I had this complete opposite experience. And yeah, so I just felt like God really protected me through that. So, I don't know if that advice works for everybody, but you do have to really be aware that you're putting yourself under the authority of people that want to make that movie, especially if it's really, just anti-God, just like not something that it's not even neutral, it's not even just like, it's a comedy, it's a rom-com or whatever, it's like, it really is dark, so yeah, that's my only advice, I guess.
Yeah. It's so good.
It's powerful though.
No, so good. Man, yeah, I think it really hits home, for a lot of us who are navigating this industry, and trying to decide what to work on, and because most of my friends and us, we're not always working on our own projects, right? We're having to go and decide what we're going to do, and that question is huge. Like morally, what are we willing to do? And what are we? What is that line? And I think the question of, making, being a Christian filmmaker or being a Christian making films, right? Like that's the differentiation of it, right? And I think that there's such a importance in, that walk with God, and listening to the Spirit within wherever, you're going, because I think it really. It goes to show, just like you said, right? Like if you're able to stand and say no to things, that might hurt your soul, that the Lord always has His hand on that, and will, even if you didn't make as much money or do this thing, right? Like you had an amazing experience. I think it really goes to, to be a really good advice for those who are battling with that.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, I'm curious. Even just hearing that. Yeah, I'm curious if that kind of rings true for you. Like, do you have a distinction between the two, or do you see yourself in one of those buckets, or like how does that play out in your work, in your line of work?
Well, I feel like, because I do feel like God told me, like I say, way back when I kept asking, it said, tell stories that let the world know that I'm good. And so I feel like, to me, that's the qualifier, right? Like it doesn't even have to necessarily be It can be an allegory. It could be whatever. There's lots of things, lots of ways to do that. But I just feel like that's the only qualifier, like it could be a story that never once anything takes place in a church and nobody's ever, says a prayer or anything. Right. But you can still show that God's good, right? You can still show God's goodness. So I feel like that's really the only, it doesn't even have to be labeled a Christian film to me. Like, for me, I mean, I happen to work in this industry, so that's the genre that I'm in, but I just think as long as somehow or another, God is good.
That's so good, man.
Amazing. Do you think that you could we're going to wrap this up. I think that's a great way to end. But is there a final thought you'd like to, leave for, filmmakers in general who are listening to this, who are looking to either, create the kind of stuff that you guys are creating or just be in the film industry in general, right? Like just what kind of advice would you leave us with?
Yeah, I think that probably the only thing that comes to mind, which might be exactly what you're looking for, but it's really about honing the craft. Like I feel like because the advent of streamers, right? Like so much. I mean, now the writer strike's happening, so it's slowed down a ton. But like last spring, even like you couldn't hardly find anybody for a position, anything. You wanted a sound utility or a camera loader or whatever. It's like even the entry level jobs, right? Were just like it was almost impossible to find somebody for every job because there's so many people working, so many projects going on. But I think that, which is great, right? People get to be employed. That's awesome. But the flip side of that is that you end up climbing through the ranks faster than what you maybe should. Like I would do films. Like I grew up in LA, right? Not I didn't grow up, but I mean, my film industry was time of growing up in film was in Los Angeles, and I'm used to, it would take 10 years for guys to go from being a grip to being a key grip, or whatever. Like people would put in the hours and the work and really, really, really work the way up through. And then we did a film in New Mexico because New Mexico was the first one to have film rebates, right? So I did a film in New Mexico, and we went back like a year and a half later to New Mexico, and all of a sudden, all these people that were PAs on the first film I did in Mexico were like seconds in like wardrobe and whatever and like set there. So cause I'm like, wait, what is like a year and a half ago you were a PA and now you're a lead man or whatever, and it's like there seemed to be something lost there in actually learning the craft, like actually learning all the things necessary and building up a skill and like really looking at it as a craft, no matter what you do in the film, even if you're a craft service person, right? It's like what, be the best you can at that, and like really, really learn that skill set to work your way up through it. And so I feel like that's important. I feel like there's, it's like everybody wants everything fast and quick and make more money and all that. It's like really take the time, and don't be afraid to, if it's a bigger project. I mean, if it's a smaller project, you probably don't necessarily want to get demoted or whatever. But if it's a bigger project, there's something you can learn on it by maybe doing a job that you feel like you're already past that job. Like, don't be afraid to do that. If you can afford to, as long as it still pays well enough to make your mortgage or whatever. But like, just be willing to learn, especially if it's under somebody that, like, I think I could learn from this person. Don't be too proud to take that gig. And really keep learning, like just keep learning. Like you never stop, like always keep learning.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Amazing. It's so good.
That's great. I love it.
Awesome. Well, Daryl, thank you so much for being on Filming in Between podcast with us. We loved hearing your story. I think it's really going to help a lot of young filmmakers navigate this world.
Awesome.
And, excited to see what you guys are doing next. Can't wait to
how can people keep up with you and your work? Like what's how can people stay connected with you?
Yeah, I mean, everything I do right now, because I'm a full-time in-house employee with Kingdom Story Company. So yeah, Kingdom Story Company has its own Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. And we're actually blowing it up some too, because we found that people know our movies, but they don't necessarily know that they're always from us, because they're not necessarily always directed by John or Andy Irwin or whatever, different John Gunn directs some and Brett McCorkle, it's like we have different directors. And so we're trying to get more of a brand as Kingdom Story Company. It's like, oh, they've heard of all these different films, but didn't even know they were connected. So, cool. So Kingdom Story Company is
We'll make sure
everywhere.
to put that all in the show notes and on
Yeah.
the description box and all that different stuff. But
Cool.
Kingdom, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
Daryl,
All
thank
right.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. All right. You bet.
Awesome.
Take care.
For sure.
Bye.